Now, this is not a minor niche health issue to be discussed in whispers. This is an absolute public health emergency that demands high level clinical literacy. When clinical systems dismiss our heavy bleeding, when doctors minimize our pelvic pressure, or when society tells us to just push through the pain, they are actively ignoring a structural epidemic. Now, educating yourself on these specific distinct biomarkers, understanding your body's volumetric, coagulation, and spatial metrics is the first and most radical step to reclaiming your biological authority. You are not crazy, you are not weak, and you are not imagining things. Your body is leaving a data trail, and today we have learned exactly how to decode it.
They been cramping my style all week. Craving chocolate trees, checking pants, checking seeds, sipping herbal tea, and fight for menstrual equity. Hey, I kick Cramp's ass. Kick Cramp's ass. Kick Cramp, hey. 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 You're now tuned in to the Kick Cramp's Ass podcast with your host, Brittany Walker, advocating for menstrual equity, period poverty, and womb wellness. New episodes on Menstruation Mondays.
Happy Menstruation Monday, and welcome back to the Kick Cramp's Ass podcast, where we treat language as a clinical weapon and biological data as our absolute currency. I am your host, Brittany Walker, and today is July 6th, which marks the beginning of an incredibly vital conversation on our calendar, Fibroid Awareness Month. We refer to uterine fibroids as the silent epidemic because millions of individuals are walking around with structural changes in their reproductive tracts, completely unaware that their daily exhaustion, pelvic pressure, and blinding pain are not just a normal part of being a menstruator. Now, recently I had the profound opportunity to visit Bodies the exhibition at the Luxor Hotel in Las Vegas, Nevada. And family, I spent a significant amount of time studying the female reproductive anatomy section. Seeing the human body completely preserved and plastinated changes your relationship with your internal landscape. Now, when you look at a healthy non pathological uterus, you realize how compact, efficient, and beautifully integrated it is within the pelvic bowl. Now, it sits perfectly nested near the bladder and the rectum. But when you see a specimen affected by benign tumors like fibroids, the spatial reality hits you. You see how a benign muscular growth can completely distort the architecture of the pelvis. It stretches the uterine wall, crowds the bladder, and compresses pelvic blood vessels and alters the local tissue environment. Seeing that anatomical reality underscored a truth I preach every single Menstruation Monday on this podcast. Knowledge is power, and educating yourself will always be your absolute best resource. You cannot advocate for a body you do not understand. Today, we are bringing the anatomical clarity into your headphones. So, to center our minds, let's move into our I am power statement for today. We like to kick off each episode with the I am power statement, with I representing inspiration, A representing affirmations, and M representing manifestations. And the I am power statement for today is I am completely attuned to the subtle and structural data of my body. I refuse to normalize my pain. I reject the dismissal of my symptoms, and I possess the absolute health, literacy, and biological authority to advocate for my own reproductive healing. Now, before we dive in, we're going to go ahead and take a good old sip of our Cramp elixir. We're going to cut to a quick commercial break, and we will be right back with you. Tired of clunky remote recordings? Level up with Riverside FM Pro. Get studio quality audio and video, effortless editing with powerful AI tools, and seamless live streaming and collaboration. Become a pro of Riverside.fm and unlock the full potential of your content. Sign up today and make your voice heard. Visit the link in the description of this episode to discover more. Now, back to the show. Welcome back from that commercial break. We hope that you enjoyed it. Now let's dive straight into the clinical diagnostics. We have to address the toxic normalization of reproductive pain head on. So many individuals are told by well-meaning family members or biased, rushed clinical systems that passing golf ball-sized clots, being entirely incapacitated by pain, or bleeding through a super tampon in less than an hour is just your unique flow, or being part of a woman or a menstruator. Now, we are drawing a hard, non negotiable line in the sand today. What is the difference between a naturally heavy period and a structural fibroid pathology? Let's look at the markers you may pay attention to, and let's ground this analysis in the undeniable physical evidence I stood face to face with at the body's exhibition. Now, if you are watching on Spotify or YouTube, I want you to look closely at these actual anatomical visuals with me. A disclaimer that you will see an actual human body in fibroids. These images were taken with permission by my phone at the exhibit. Now, before we look at the tumors themselves, we have to look at the structural real estate of the human pelvic bowl. If you look at this image, you can see a complete plastinated female specimen. Look at the balance of the muscular skeletal frame and how the torso houses our organ systems. When you drop your gaze down to the pelvic basin, you see the profound engineering of our anatomy. Notice how compact the pelvic bowl truly is. The uterus, the bladder, and the rectum share an incredibly tight, high pressurized space. Now, there is no empty space down there. Everything is beautifully crowded, resting millimeter to millimeter against surrounding nerve pathways, blood vessels, and ligaments. Now, in a healthy non-pathological state, this configuration allows for seamless biological function. But when a physical mass begins to expand within the delicate basin, it changes the entire structural environment. Now, look at the tissue integration. When you see the actual pathways of the pelvic nerves and the placement of the bladder directly anterior to the uterus, you immediately realize that a symptom like pelvic pressure isn't a vague psychological feeling. It is a literal mechanical displacement of your internal organs. Now, when a benign muscular growth, known clinically as a leiomyoma, takes root, it fundamentally rewrites the tissue properties of the uterine wall. If you look at this image titled Uterine Fibroid with Iteration of Uterine Wall, you can physically see the dense asymmetric fibrous nature of this tissue. This isn't a soft, compliant structure. It is a tough, unyielding mass that creates localized inflammation and chronic irritation along the smooth muscular layers. Depending on exactly where these tumors choose to plant themselves, they present distinct structural markers. Let's break down the three primary classifications using our three key markers. Now, the volumetric marker and submucosal fibroids. A clinically normal menstrual cycle involves a total blood loss of roughly 30 to 80 millimeters across your entire bleed. If you are saturating a pad or tampon every single hour for consecutive hours, or if you have to wake up in the middle of the night to change your protection to avoid flooding your sheets, that is menorrhagia, a key clinical marker for fibroids. Now, to see exactly why this happens, look at this image, the submucosal uterine fibroid. The anatomical placard notes that a submucosal fibroid lies just under the inner lining of the uterus or the endometrium. As the tumor grows, it pushes directly into the uterine cavity. It increases the surface area of endometrium exponentially, meaning there is simply more tissue to shed. Furthermore, it physically prevents the surrounding blood vessels from constricting efficiently to shut off the bleed. It leaves the vascular bed open, creating that relentless, exhausting volumetric flood. Next, the structural coagulation marker and intramural fibroids. While minor fluid or dime-sized clots can occur as the endometrial lining breaks down, passing dark blood clots that are larger than a quarter is a major diagnostic red flag. For the physical mechanism behind this, let's take a look at this image, the intramural uterine fibroid, explicitly labeled as a leiomyoma. An intramural fibroid develops directly within the thick, smooth muscle layer of the uterus, the myometrium. Look at how dense that cross section is. When a leiomyoma embeds itself inside of the muscular wall, it disrupts the uterus's ability to contract symmetrically. Normally, the myometrium uses uniform contractions to cleanly pump out blood. An intramural fibroid acts like a boulder in the middle of a stream. The blood pools in the irregular pockets created by the tumor, stagnating within the uterine cavity, where it begins to coagulate and form large, painful clots before it even manages to pass through the cervix. And then finally, the spatial and pressure markers and subserosal fibroids. A naturally heavy period causes cramping primarily during your bleed due to temporary prostaglandin surges. Now, uterine fibroids, however, cause persistent pelvic mass symptoms. Because they are physically space occupying structures, they create chronic dull pelvic pressure outside of your window of menstruation. So look at this image at the subserosal uterine fibroid. As the placard states, subserosal fibroids develop just under the serosa, the covering of the outside of the uterine wall. These growths project outward into the pelvic basin rather than inward. They have the potential to cause severe symptoms related to the direct pressure they place on neighboring organs. Now, if you look at the pelvic spatial architecture we see in this image and compare it to the outward growing mass that we saw in our previous images, you can see exactly why you might experience severe urinary frequency. The tumor is physically crushing your bladder, reducing its capacity to a fraction of what it should be. If the subserosal mass grows posteriorly, it presses into the spinal nerves and rectum, causing chronic lower back pain, deep pelvic aching, constipation, or localized pain during intercourse or dyspareunia. You are dealing with a spatial crowding emergency, not a heavy period. Now let's ground these anatomical visuals in recent epidemiological data because the numbers are absolutely staggering. According to the clinical research published by the National Institutes of Health, by age 50, up to 80% of African American menstruators and 70% of Caucasian menstruators will develop uterine fibroids. But family, we have to look closer at the intersectional data because this is where the public health crisis resides. The data clearly shows that Black menstruators were diagnosed with fibroids at significantly younger ages, often in their 20s, experience faster tumor growth rates, are more likely to have multiple large tumors simultaneously, and suffer from significantly more severe debilitating symptoms. Why is this? In psychology and public health, we look at the concept of allostatic load and weathering. The chronic systemic stress of navigating systemic bias, institutional racism, and economic inequity actively shifts our internal biochemistry. Chronic stress floods the system with cortisol, disrupts the hypothalamic pituitary adrenaline HPA axis, and drains our protective progesterone levels and leave us vulnerable to profound estrogen dominance. Now, estrogen, as we know, acts as a raw fuel for the tissue proliferation we saw in the second, third, fourth, and fifth images. Now, this is not a minor niche health issue to be discussed in whispers. This is an absolute public health emergency that demands high level clinical literacy. When clinical systems dismiss our heavy bleeding, when doctors minimize our pelvic pressure, or when society tells us to just push through the pain, they are actively ignoring a structural Epidemic. Now, educating yourself on these specific distinct biomarkers, understanding your body's volumetric, coagulation, and spatial metrics is the first and most radical step to reclaiming your biological authority. You are not crazy, you are not weak, and you are not imagining things. Your body is leaving a data trail, and today we have learned exactly how to decode it. Take a moment and let all of this information sit in. We are going to go ahead and cut to our next commercial break, and we will be right back with you. Periods got you down? Kick cramps to the curb with Pilates for periods. Our online program combines targeted Pilates, soothing yoga, calming meditation, and breath work to help you manage your menstrual cycle naturally. Feel stronger, calmer, and more in control. Reclaim your comfort. Visit Pilates for Periods YouTube page linked in the description of this episode and start your journey to a more manageable cycle today. Now, back to the show. Welcome back from that commercial break. We hope that you enjoyed it. Now, to take full control of your menstrual cycle, beautiful beings, we have to look past the surface symptoms and investigate what is actually driving the cellular proliferation. It is not enough to just complain about the heavy bleeding or map the pelvic mass pressure. We have to ask why our cells are misbehaving. While fibroids are clinically defined as monoclonal benign tumors arising from the smooth muscle cells of the myometrium, their growth is profoundly fueled by two primary systemic drivers: estrogen dominance and progesterone dysregulation. Now, when we look at the tissue's genetics, fibroid tissue contains a significantly higher density of both estrogen and progesterone receptors compared to normal, healthy uterine muscles. It is hypersynthesized. It is essentially sitting, waiting to capture any hormonal signal floating through your bloodstream. But beyond internal genetics, what are the modern environmental disruptors that are weathering our menstruating bodies and feeding the epidemic? Why are our bodies working overtime to maintain structural balance? Let's break down the three primary systemic disruptors that act as modern liquid fertilizer for these tumors. First, xenoestrogens and endocrine disrupting chemicals, or EDCs. We live in a world saturated with synthetic man made chemicals that mimic natural estrogen in the human body, known clinically as xenoestrogens. Think about your daily environment. From the conventional beauty products you put onto your skin, to the plastic containers you store your food in, and to the synthetic fragrances warming up your home. Chemicals like phtalates, parabens, and bisphenol A, BPA, possess a molecular structure that acts like a master key for your cellular estrogen receptors. When you use products loaded with these EDCs, they enter our bloodstream, bind directly to those hyperdense receptors in your myometrium, and send a continuous amplified false signal to the uterine muscle cells to rapidly multiply. Your body thinks it is just processing its own natural hormones, but it is actually being hijacked by synthetic imposters that lock your reproductive tissue into a perpetual growth cycle. Then, number two, we have chronic allostatic load and the cortisol still. We cannot talk about the psychology of health without talking about the stress biology. High stress fundamentally alter your HPA axis, the command center for your entire hormonal architecture. Now, when your body is chronically pumping out cortisol because you are navigating modern systemic pressures, systemic racism, and economic survival, or institutional weathering, your endocrine system initiates an emergency survival protocol. To keep up with the relentless demand for stress hormones, your body utilizes a biochemical mechanism often referred to as the progesterone steal. It actively diverts raw hormonal building blocks away from producing protective, calming progesterone in order to synthesize more cortisol. Now, progesterone's primary job in the uterus is to keep estrogen's growth signals in check. Now, when your chronic allostatic load depletes your progesterone reserves to fuel your survival pathways, it leaves circulating estrogen completely unchecked and unbound. This hormonal power vacuum gives fibroids the green light to expand without any internal braking system. And then number three, metabolic dysregulation and insulin resistance. The third major disruptor in the direct link between our metabolic health and our reproductive tissues. When we consume diets high in ultra processed sugars, or when chronic stress keeps our blood sugar elevated, our pancreas is forced to pump out high levels of insulin to cope. Over time, this leads to elevated baseline insulin and insulin resistance. Here is the precise clinical chain reaction you need to know. Elevated baseline insulin directly stimulates the liver to produce less of a crucial protein called sex hormone binding globulin, or SHBG. Think of SHBG as your body's hormonal traffic cop. Its job is to float through your bloodstream, bind to excess sex hormones, and keep them inactive until your body actually needs them. When insulin suppresses SHBG production, you are left with a massive surge of free, unbound, highly active estrogen circulating aggressively throughout your bloodstream. This free estrogen targets your myometrium, feeding the tumors we saw preserved in those cross sections and turning a metabolic imbalance into a structural reproductive crisis. Now, family, understanding this underlying biochemistry changes the entire game. It proves that a fibroid diagnosis is not a random design flaw. Your body is responding dynamically to an overload modern ecosystem, and by identifying these cellular disruptors, we can finally begin to alter the internal soil. Now, when you receive a fibroid diagnosis, the conventional medical system often places you in a highly restrictive choice architecture. Typically, you are given two pathways: go on a synthetic birth control or hormonal suppressants to mask the heavy bleeding, or engage in a policy of watchful waiting, essentially waiting until the tumors grow large, agonizing, and disruptive enough to justify a major surgical intervention like a myomectomy or a full hysterectomy. But we refuse to sit passively in a system that only offers options at the extremes of masking or cutting. Let me be entirely clear. Surgery is absolutely a necessary life saving medical tool for severe acute cases. If a fibroid is cutting off circulation or severely threatening your health, thank medicine for those surgical interventions. But surgery removes the symptom. It does not remove the underlying systemic environment that signaled the body to grow the tumor in the first place. If we don't change the internal soil where the fibroids sprout, we remain vulnerable to recurrence. We have to build a comprehensive, daily holistic infrastructure that addresses the root metabolic and endocrine drivers. Let's break down three foundational pillars of that healing infrastructure. First, let's talk about phase specific liver detoxification and estrogen clearance. Your liver is the primary metabolic engine responsible for identifying, breaking down, and clearing out spent estrogen from your bloodstream. This happens in two precise stages: phase 1 and phase 2 detoxification. In phase 1, the liver converts active estrogen into a lighter intermediate form. And then in phase 2, it binds that intermediate molecule to a protective nutrient compound, a process called conjugation, rendering it completely harmless and water soluble so your bowels and kidneys can safely escort it out of your body. Now, if your liver pathways are sluggish or lack proper nutritional cofactors, that estrogen doesn't leave. Instead, an enzyme in the gut called beta glucuronidase can uncouple the deactivated hormone, reactivating it and sending it right back into circulation to feed the hyperdense receptors in the uterine wall. Now, to support this metabolic clearance, you must flood your plate with an abundance of organic cruciferous vegetables. Think broccoli, kale, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, or even arugula. These whole foods contain rich amounts of endo-3 carbinol and DIM, which is diindolylmethane. These specific plant-based molecules optimize phase 2 pathway efficiency, shifting your estrogen metabolism away from proliferative pathways and supporting systemic hormonal balance. And then number two, eliminating environmental burden and purging xenoestrogens. Now, the second pillar requires us to look outside our physiology and audit our daily environments. We just broke down how synthetic endocrine disrupting chemicals, or EDCs, mimic our natural hormones and lock our smooth muscle cells into a growth loop. Now, if we want our liver to successfully clear out internal estrogen dominance, we have to stop adding fuel to the fire from the outside. Now, this means systematically transitioning your household and daily habits from these synthetic burdens. Start with the easiest high impact switches. Transition away from storing or heating your food in plastic containers, which leach the BPA directly into your meals, and adopt glass, stainless steel, or ceramic alternatives. Take a close look at your morning routine and choose clean paraben and phthalate free topical products. Finally, purge synthetic fragrances from your home. Conventional plug-ins, toxic aerosols, and paraffin-based candles are notorious delivery systems for airborne xenoestrogens that pass straight through your respiratory lining into your bloodstream. By lowering this daily toxic exposure, you instantly ease the metabolic burden on your liver, allowing it to focus on cellular repair. And then third, somatic pelvic movement and breaking vascular stagnation. The final pillar brings our clinical physiology with mindful movement. Fibroid growth structurally thrives in stagnant, congested, low oxygen environments within the pelvic bowl. When we sit at desks for 8 to 10 hours a day, compress our abdomens, or hold chronic stress in our pelvic floors, we restrict arterial blood flow and impair local lymphatic drainage. Through specific low pelvic yoga sequencing and restorative somatic movement, we can intentionally disrupt the stagnation. By moving the hips and pelvis through their natural anatomical ranges of motion without overexerting our metabolic baseline, we achieve a dual therapeutic effect. First, we downregulate the sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight stress response, which immediately curbs the high cortisol production that drains our protective progesterone. Second, we fundamentally improve the local vascular and lymphatic circulation to the pelvic basin. Bringing fresh, high oxygenated, nutrient dense blood to the uterine tissue supports local immune surveillance and clears out pelvic fluid congestion. Moving your body isn't about burning calories, it's about altering the physical and mechanical environment of your cells. Now, as we let this valuable information sink in, we're going to cut to our final commercial break and we will be right back with you.
Do you want? Fly, fly. Do you want to fly? Fly. Let go of all the things that hold you down. Used to be so easy.
Now, back to the show. Welcome back from the commercial break. We hope that you enjoyed it. Now, beautiful beings, as we close out this foundational blueprint for Fibroid Awareness Month, I want you to take a deep grounding breath with me and let that settle into your nervous system. Carry this absolute truth with you into the rest of your week. Your symptoms are not your destiny. They are certainly not your fault. There is an immense amount of medical gaslighting and societal shame that tries to convince us that a distorted, painful reproductive baseline is just our cross to bear. It is not. But your health literacy, now that is your ultimate weapon. It is your shield, your data set, and your currency. Do not allow anyone, whether it is a well meaning family member, repeating generational myths, or a rush practitioner in a biased clinical system, to normalize a lower quality of life for you simply because they refuse to look deeply or accurately at your reproductive vital signs. Before we part ways today, let's anchor everything we unpacked into your executive summary. If you are writing this down in your wellness journals, these are your 4 high yield takeaways from episode 12. Number 1, the pelvic bowl is high value real estate. As we saw so clearly in the human tissue specimens from the body expeditions in the photos that we showed, the pelvic basin is tightly engineered. Uterine fibroids are not isolated issues. They are physical space occupying masses that compress surrounding blood vessels, crowd the bladder, and irritate the uterine wall as physically preserved. Number 2, decode the diagnostic markers. Stop letting people tell you a flooding period is normal. You know how to differentiate a heavy bleed from a structural pathology. Pay attention to the volumetric meter marker. Bleeding through protection every single hour driven by submucosal fibroids, as we saw in the structural coagulation marker image. Passing dark clots larger than a quarter because intramural fibroids trap blood in the myometrium, and the spatial and pressure markers, chronic back pain, urinary frequency, and deep pelvic aching outside your bleed, driven by subserosal fibroids as seen in the previous images. Number 3, you're going to audit your internal and external soil. Fibroids do not grow in a vacuum. They are monoclonal tumors hypersynthesized to estrogen and progesterone. We must address the modern environmental and psychological disruptors weathering our bodies, specifically purging synthetic xenoestrogens, EDCs, from plastics and fragrances, managing our allostatic load to prevent stress from stealing our protective progesterone, and reversing metabolic dysregulation before high insulin drops hormone binding proteins and leaves free estrogen unchecked. And then 4, build a multi-pillar holistic infrastructure. While medical and surgical interventions are vital for severe acute cases, long-term cellular containment requires a lifestyle infrastructure. This means fueling phase 1 and phase 2 liver detoxification using plant-based cofactors like DIM and endo-3 carbinol with cruciferous vegetables to clear out spent estrogen, and eliminating toxic burdens from our homes, and utilizing slow restorative pelvic opening somatic movements to smash local vascular stagnation and lower sympathetic nervous system overdrive. Now, beautiful beings, true transformation requires translation from theory into daily practice. Now, if this episode upgraded your health literacy, if it validated your lived experience, and if it handed you the clinical tools you need to advocate for your own physiology, do not keep this space a secret. Hit that subscribe button right now. Leave a 5-star like or review on whatever platform you are streaming us on, and share this episode with a loved one who has been suffering in silence. Feel free to share with someone who you feel can resonate with this episode or our mission. Also, subscribe to our Pilates for Periods YouTube channel, our fitness and mindfulness, meditation, and breathwork program. Join our newsletter and stay deeply connected to all of the resources, evidence-based tips, and structural health education we drop every single week. This information is located in the description of this episode. Now, if you have any questions or concerns, we are still accepting listeners' mail, so feel free to comment on this episode, or for a more intimate or private conversation, email us at contact@KitKrampsAsk, also listed in the description of this episode. Let's start an open dialogue right now in the community space. Drop a comment below and tell us, have you ever had to advocate for your symptoms when they were dismissed as just a heavy period? How did you navigate this conversation? Let's share our strategies and build collective power. We are so deeply and honored to walk this path of total biological authority, health equity, and radical body sovereignty with you every single Menstruation Monday. Tune in, look data forward, and never settle for managed pain. Stay deeply mindful, protect your internal peace, and keep moving. Gratitude to all of you for tuning in today. We do manifest a positive, productive, and peaceful remainder of your day, your week, and your menstrual journey ahead. And we'll be speaking to you during our next episode on next Menstruation Monday. Peace.